Breaking news. Behind the glittering walls of the White House, a shocking secret has been exposed. Sources close to the First Lady claim that Melania Trump, the wife of the sitting President of the United States, has endured years of humiliation and abuse in silence. For decades, she was presented as the graceful, stoic figure at Trump's side, but now insiders allege that behind closed doors she lived in fear, her quiet demeanor not a choice, but a shield. Whispers began with former staffers, who described scenes of shouting, slammed doors, and moments when Melania appeared visibly shaken after private encounters with her husband. One former aide told reporters, "She always looked like a prisoner in her own home. People think her silence was indifference, but really, it was survival." Another staff member recalled seeing bruises hastily covered with makeup before public events. The stories, though hushed, paint a portrait of a First Lady trapped in a golden cage. For millions of Americans, the revelations strike at the heart of power itself. How could the most powerful house in the world hide such darkness? And what does it mean if even the First Lady, surrounded by cameras and security, could not escape fear in her own home? Jasmine Crockett stepped forward with words that cut through the silence. This is not a partisan issue. This is not about Republicans or Democrats. This is about a woman, a human being, who may have suffered in silence for years while the world looked the other way. If the First Lady is not safe in her own home, then no woman in America can feel safe. Her statement shocked Washington. For the first time, someone in Congress dared to break the code of silence around Melania Trump, not to mock her, but to defend her. The story is no longer about politics or gossip. It is about humanity, dignity, and the hidden cost of silence. The whispers around Melania Trump's private life grew louder as more insiders began to speak. Former members of the Secret Service, though careful with their words, hinted at moments that now look impossible to ignore. One agent described tense nights in the residence when raised voices echoed down the hallway, followed by long stretches of silence. "You could feel the weight in the air," he said. It wasn't the sound of a healthy marriage. It was something darker. White House staffers recalled moments that seemed small at the time, but now stand as haunting signals. A makeup artist confessed that she once noticed faint bruising along Melania's arm as she prepared her for a state dinner. When asked about it, the First Lady brushed it off with a practiced smile. "Just clumsy, I suppose." Another aide remembered her rehearsing speeches in front of a mirror, only to suddenly stop, eyes filling with tears, whispering, "What difference does it make? He'll just laugh at me anyway." For years, the public saw Melania's quiet demeanor as coldness or indifference, but insiders now suggest it was her armor, a way to survive humiliation behind closed doors. Even her carefully choreographed public appearances held hidden messages. Analysts point to the infamous moment when she swatted away Trump's hand on camera. At the time, it was laughed off as a marital quirk. Now it looks like a cry for space, a silent rebellion broadcast to millions. The revelations have sent shockwaves through the country. Women across America, especially older viewers who endured abusive marriages in silence themselves, began flooding call-in shows with their own testimonies. "I see myself in her," one caller confessed. "That blank look in her eyes. I wore the same look for years." Jasmine Crockett seized the moment to reframe the story. At a press briefing, she said, "Melania Trump is not just a First Lady. She is a woman who may have suffered in silence, mocked by the world while enduring pain no one should endure. Her story is not about politics. It's about the millions of women who carry bruises hidden under long sleeves and smiles. If even the First Lady cannot escape that, what does that say about the safety of women everywhere?" the narrative had shifted. What once seemed like tabloid speculation was now a national conversation about hidden abuse, power, and silence. And Jasmine Crockett was making sure that America could no longer look away. The nation erupted with emotion. For years, Melania Trump had been an enigma, stoic, reserved, often criticized as distant. But now, with insiders speaking out, Americans began to see her not as cold, but as a woman surviving behind glass walls. Talk shows lit up with callers, women, seniors, even veterans' wives, sharing how they recognized the silent signals. "I know that blank stare," one woman said on live TV. "It's the look of someone who's been silenced for years." Protests began to form outside the White House. Not the usual crowds of political demonstrators, but gatherings of women carrying signs that read, "We believe Melania," and "Silence is not consent." Survivors of domestic violence stood shoulder to shoulder chanting, "Her pain is our pain." For the first time in modern history, the First Lady became a symbol of millions of women who had hidden their suffering. The shockwaves rippled through Washington. Editorial boards wrote columns demanding answers. One headline in the New York Times read, "If she wasn't safe in the White House, who is?" Politicians from both parties scrambled to respond, but none carried the same moral weight as Jasmine Crockett. Standing before reporters, Jasmine's tone was steady, but fierce. "This is not gossip. This is not speculation. This is about a woman who may have endured humiliation and abuse while cameras flashed and the world looked away. Melania Trump deserves dignity, respect, and protection, and every woman in America deserves the same." Her words cut through partisan noise, making it clear this was a human crisis, not a political stunt. But Donald Trump responded with fury. At a hastily called press conference, his face red, he slammed the podium. "Fake news, fake stories, total lies. My wife has never been abused, never. This is an attack on me, on my presidency, on America." He accused Jasmine Crockett of fabricating a narrative to score cheap points, calling her a disgusting liar, a clown, and a disgrace. The performance backfired. The more he shouted, the more the nation remembered the images of Melania's distant stare, her withdrawn body language, the infamous hand swat. To many, his rage looked less like a defense and more like the behavior described by the very allegations. Social media ignited. Hashtags. Number 1. We Believe Melania and number 1 Her Silence Speaks trended for days. Memes showed side-by-side clips. Melania's blank expression contrasted with Trump's red-faced tirades. For millions of Americans, the contrast was undeniable. The silence of a woman versus the rage of a man with too much power. And Jasmine Crockett, calm and resolute, became the voice giving Melania what she had been denied for years. Someone willing to say out loud what everyone else was too afraid to admit. The revelations refused to fade. Each day, new voices stepped forward, adding weight to the narrative that Melania Trump's silence was not indifference, but survival. A former White House housekeeper described moments when the First Lady avoided public appearances for days at a time, claiming illness, though staff whispered of tension behind closed doors. Another aide recalled hearing her pleading in a hushed tone during an argument, only for the room to fall eerily quiet minutes later. Security personnel gave anonymous statements that painted the same chilling picture. One officer admitted, "We were trained never to interfere, but sometimes you just knew something was wrong." You could feel the fear. Their accounts echoed what Americans had already suspected for years, that the First Lady of the United States was living in a cage of control and intimidation. The pressure on the White House grew unbearable. Reporters peppered press briefings with questions. Is the First Lady safe? Why has she remained silent? What does the president have to say beyond denial? The administration dodged, deflected, and grew visibly defensive. The silence from Melania herself was deafening, but her absence from events only fueled speculation. Outside, the protests swelled. Crowds of women marched with purple ribbons, symbols of domestic abuse awareness, chanting, "If she's not safe, none of us are." Survivors shared their stories on national television, drawing direct parallels between their lives and the First Lady's. America's private pain had suddenly become its most public debate. And in the middle of the storm stood Jasmine Crockett. At a packed town hall, she shifted the conversation from one woman's suffering to a national reckoning. This is not only about Melania Trump. This is about the millions of women who suffer in silence, unseen and unheard. If even the First Lady cannot find safety in the most guarded home in the world, then what hope does a single mother in Detroit have? What hope does a grandmother in Texas have? What hope does any woman have? Her words struck like a hammer. She wasn't simply defending Melania. She was turning her story into a symbol of all silenced voices. As the nation grappled with the implications, Jasmine closed with a devastating truth. We can argue about politics all day long, but abuse is not partisan, fear is not partisan, and silence is not strength, it is suffering. Melania Trump's silence speaks for millions, and I will not let America ignore it. The crowd erupted, tears streaming, fists raised in solidarity. The story was no longer just Melania's, it was every woman's. The story exploded into its most devastating phase when new evidence surfaced, evidence that could no longer be dismissed as rumor or speculation. A close friend of Melania Trump, who had known her since her early days in New York, came forward with shocking testimony. Fighting back tears in a televised interview, she described late-night phone calls in which Melania confided that life inside the White House was not glamour, but fear. She would whisper so quietly, I could barely hear her. She said she felt trapped, watched, and mocked whenever she tried to assert herself. She told me, "The world thinks I'm cold, but I'm just surviving." Then came the leak that shook the nation. Excerpts from Melania's private correspondence, allegedly written to a confidant overseas. In one email, she described feeling like a ghost in my own home. In another, she admitted, I wear silence like a mask because my voice only brings me pain. The authenticity of the emails is now under review, but cybersecurity experts confirmed that they originated from an account long linked to the First Lady. The emotional punch was undeniable. Suddenly, the public saw beyond the polished images and designer gowns. They saw a woman who, behind the cameras, may have cried into the night, unseen and unheard. The revelations turned whispers into screams across the nation. Donald Trump reacted with characteristic fury, calling the leaks fabricated garbage and the friend a traitor hungry for attention. But his denials rang hollow. Each explosive rant only highlighted the contrast, his red-faced rage against her quiet, sorrowful words. On social media, side-by-side clips of Trump shouting and Melania's leaked phrases like, I am a ghost, went viral, under hashtags Her Words Matter and Melania Speaks. Jasmine Crockett seized the moment with unflinching force. Holding up a printed copy of one leaked message, she declared at a rally, This is not just Melania's pain. This is America's shame. A woman in the White House with every camera on her still felt invisible and powerless. What does that say to every survivor across this country? What does that say to every woman who hides her bruises, who swallows her voice, who tells herself, maybe tomorrow will be better? We cannot ignore this anymore. The crowd erupted into chants of, "We believe her, we believe her." Survivors across the nation echoed those words, flooding the internet with their own stories. Melania Trump's whispered emails had become a thunderous call for change. The revelations sent the nation into upheaval. Across America, from New York to Los Angeles, protests erupted, not over taxes or wars, but over the silent suffering of the First Lady. Women carried signs reading, "We believe Melania," "Silence hurts," and even "The White House isn't safe." Vigils were held in city squares, candles lit in solidarity with survivors of domestic violence. What had begun as whispers of a private struggle now ignited into a movement, uniting women across generations. Outside the White House, the protests swelled daily. Survivors stood shoulder to shoulder, many wearing purple scarves to symbolize their cause. One woman held up a poster that read, "If she can't speak, we will speak for her." The chants were relentless. "Her silence speaks volumes," and "Justice for Melania, justice for all." The images spread across news broadcasts, painting the stark picture of a president under siege, not for policy failures, but for the treatment of his own wife. Inside the administration, panic set in. Press briefings grew combative as reporters demanded answers. Why hasn't the First Lady spoken publicly? What is the White House hiding? Why is the president attacking witnesses instead of addressing the claims? The evasive responses only fueled suspicion. Each refusal to acknowledge the growing movement outside the gates made the silence more deafening. Donald Trump, furious, lashed out on national television. "This is the biggest lie in American history. My wife is fine. She's perfect. These are evil people, evil women, making things up to hurt me and my presidency." But his words were undercut by Melania's continued absence. Each empty chair at an event, each canceled appearance became another piece of evidence in the court of public opinion. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, rose above the chaos as the voice of the movement. At a massive rally in Chicago, she stood before tens of thousands, the leaked emails projected on a giant screen behind her. Her voice thundered, "If even the First Lady of the United States can be silenced by fear, then what hope does the waitress, the nurse, the single mother have? This is not just Melania's story. This is every woman's story. And it's time America stopped pretending not to hear it." The crowd exploded in chants of "We believe! We believe!" as Jasmine raised her fist in solidarity. What began as an exposé of Melania Trump's private pain had now transformed into a national crusade against abuse and silence. The First Lady's whispers had become the nation's roar. For the first time in history, a scandal inside the White House was not about politics or power, but about the most human, vulnerable truth of all: the cost of silence. The nation held its breath as Jasmine Crockett stepped onto a stage set against a sea of purple scarves and flickering candles. What began as whispers about Melania Trump's private suffering had grown into a nationwide movement. Tens of thousands standing in solidarity, millions watching live from their homes. Cameras zoomed in as Jasmine raised her hand for silence, her voice steady, her words sharp. For too long, women in this country have been told to stay quiet, to hide the bruises, to swallow their words, to wear silence like armor. But now, even the First Lady's silence has been broken, not by her voice, but by the truth the nation can no longer ignore. The crowd erupted in applause, then hushed again as Jasmine continued. Melania Trump has been mocked, misunderstood, and dismissed as cold. But the truth we see now is not coldness. It is survival. And if the most protected woman in America could not find safety in her own home, then every woman who has suffered in silence deserves to be heard. Her tone rose, each sentence striking like a hammer. This is not about politics. This is about humanity. This is about the waitress working double shifts, who hides her pain. The grandmother in Texas who covers her scars. The young girl who fears her voice won't matter. Their stories are Melania's story. Their silence is her silence. And together, their voices will rise. The crowd, holding candles aloft, began chanting, "We believe, we believe." Jasmine let the moment breathe, then delivered her final blow. Donald Trump can call me a clown. He can call this a witch hunt. He can scream until his voice is gone. But the truth remains. Abuse is not partisan. Fear is not partisan. And silence is not strength. It is suffering. America must choose. Do we protect the powerful, or do we protect the vulnerable? Tonight, I choose the vulnerable. And I ask you to stand with me. The cheers shook the ground. Across the nation, living rooms filled with the echo of Jasmine Crockett's words. Survivors wept. Families embraced.